I tell you what, let me make sure. Oh, yes, I muted the chat over here. Just like to welcome everybody. It's Police State once again. I know we do it pretty sporadic. We used to have a set schedule, but with Common Senseguy around, man, he is pulling down the wild smiles and the oozaloos. And now today, what a boon, the on the offensives, just left and right. So very quickly, I just would like to take a quick second to introduce everyone. You have myself, the Laughing Ogre. And then you have the Common Senseguy, the cat that you see as an icon there. You have the wonderful and inimitable Britisher. And then we have the one and the only Hugh is what we're going to refer to him today because that is his name. And he goes by another name on YouTube. We know him as On the Offensive. And you can see his icon there. If anybody doesn't know who he is, I'll be busily shooting out his information so that you can reach out and touch him on Twitter, on YouTube. You can go watch his videos and get to know this gentleman a little bit more as I have this last 2 weeks. And I want to tell you folks something. Not 1 minute has been a waste of time. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm really enjoying his ideas. But we do know something. We talked about it before the show. Common Senseguy has got so much time in this, not only getting us some excellent guests, one right after the other, but also getting a show together. So I'm not, no more further ado. I'm going to turn it right over to my esteemed co-host, the Common Senseguy.
No worries. Thank you very much, Ogo. Thank you very much. On the offensive as well. I suppose what we'll do now is we'll start off with the question of who the hell are you and why do you do the YouTube videos?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, chaps. I'm On the Offensive. I make sort of conservative, libertarian, right-wing stuff, comedy, satire, and sometimes long-form political essay-type videos. In terms of like why I started, I actually had a friend and we were going to do a podcast called On the Offensive, which I still think is a good name for a podcast. I'm not sure how good On the Offensive is for a YouTube channel, but that just kind of evolved. We never really got together and we never did it. So then I started doing a YouTube channel instead. And I can't really tell you what the impetus was to make me do it, but I guess just sort of an instinctive feeling that there was a lot of problems in the West and that kind of anger. And the fact that all my friends are leftists, pretty much, like almost everybody I know. So I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And I was pissing people off by posting on Facebook. So I just thought I don't know, put the energy to good use. And about a year and a half ago, I started my channel.
No, that's good. I mean, I've watched some of your videos. I actually quite like most of your videos, to be honest with you. I especially like the video that you did about the wedding that you went to and explaining the difference to the woman deciding that you weren't going to give the woman what she wanted and actually just walk away. I love that video.
Really, I was quite reluctant to share that story because it kind of had an anticlimax at the end. Shall I tell the tale?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Please.
Oh, how did it go? Yeah, okay, so I was at a wedding and it was in Italy. I've been traveling for about 30 hours, so I was knackered. And then my friends, there were a lot of old school friends there. I'm sorry, there's a boat going past outside, guys. I don't know if you can hear that. But anyway, yeah. So they all got me drunk immediately. They've been there for like 5 hours and they just, were chucking drinks at me. And then I was chatting to this guy and I was testing the waters, you could say, just sort of joking around. And I told him a story about my grandfather who always drives me around London. He's a Londoner. And he's completely depressed about the state of the West. He'll always be like, over there, that used to be a youth club. Now it's an Islamic center. And that used to be a good British pub. Now it's this Indian restaurant or whatever. And he basically just whinges about how how England's being invaded. And he just goes to me, the problem is these Muslims, they breed like rats, like this. And so I told the guy this story. And a lady overheard me, and she comes over, and you can tell the entitlement, can't you? It sort of drips off them, the leftist entitlement of, well, I'm one of the. Yeah, excuse me, what did you just say? And all she'd heard was Muslims breed like rats, and she didn't know I was quoting my grandfather. So she comes in, and I think she was expecting like a big win. And she's got me there. She's got me at a party. It could have been quite a decent scene had I decided to sort of fight my case. But yeah, instead I just I just threw my sort of hands in the air, put the palms to the sky, just went like this. I just walked off. The next day, actually, her boyfriend came up to me. Like there was this guy death staring me across the wedding because this was like pre-wedding drinks. So he came over, and I have to say I did back down a little bit because he was like, you know, so you got a problem with Muslims, huh? And I used that response that I think is a bit disingenuous, where you go, oh no, I don't. You know, Muslims are individuals. I just have a problem with Islam. But I think it's a bit disingenuous because, you know, obviously, like when you the amount of stories that come out of England, you know, just every week there's another rape gang. It's pretty hard to be like, yeah, I love Muslims. You know what I mean? When
No,
they're just
I completely understand, mate. That's what goes on to the next question quite well, actually, to be fair. Some people with those type of views will probably try and pronounce you as an alt-right member or a Nazi. What is your political views, in your own words?
You know, total Nazi, mate. Conservative, and I'm like very conservative on social issues. Like I can't think of any area where I disagree with a conservative when we talk about, you know, human behavior, human interaction. I believe in things like courting and not sleeping around, and I'm against abortion. And yeah, I used to be like, hey, who cares? Like live and let live on the gay marriage thing as well. But now I'm more like, I don't know. It seems like once you open that's like a Pandora's box. Like, I've actually been to a gay wedding. You know, I've got gay mates, but there is something about the LGBTQIA plus agenda at the moment that's just a bit mental, and it seems to also stem from that. So yeah, there's me on the social side, and then I'm a libertarian, so of the sort of the Mises, Rothbard, Hopper variety.
Don't take this the wrong way when I ask this question, because I know it's not on the actual map, so to speak. Do you think that being a libertarian and a conservative really crosses the boundaries? Because sometimes you couldn't be a libertarian while thinking that you're a conservative, if you understand my point.
Yeah, I think actually they go hand in hand. Like, if you've read, well, I'll assume people don't know, but if you've read any Hopper where he lays out the libertarian social order, it does require a conservative attitude to maintain it. It requires a conservative outlook. I think they go hand in hand. The difference is, like, you know, most conservatives today want the government to do their bidding. So if you say you're a libertarian conservative, then obviously you don't want the government to do your bidding. But I do believe, like, a society which has limited, like almost zero government, right? Like no welfare, none of these benefits. You've almost ensured, just by establishing an economic system, by you know, in place, getting these systems in place, that leftism or socialism and these ideas, you know, they cannot exist. They cannot survive a libertarian social order. Like the only people who would be able to survive are conservative-minded people, family-orientated, people who want to build community, people who want to do things for themselves. Anybody else would want to leave such a society. So I think they go together pretty nicely. I don't feel like there's any conflict there. The only thing is, like, you know, if you say, well, are you pro-gay marriage? I'd say no, which seems like I'd want to regulate against it. Like ideally you wouldn't want to regulate against it, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, I'm not in favor of it. Does that make sense?
No,
it just doesn't jive with libertarianism. I would just say this: the one thing that and maybe it does, maybe you can help me understand how it jives, because the one thing that I see, especially about the gay marriage thing, okay, is that why is the law involved in marriage at all? It's something that should involve the church or whatever. I mean, by church, I mean your Buddhist temple, whoever the town fathers, the village fathers, whatever you're, you know, I'm an old man, so give me a little break on that if I say things in the Judaic Christian vernacular. It's just the vernacular, I know. So if you see what I mean, I just don't think the state should be involved. If the state is involved, well, if they want to make the state come in and tell them they got to split it up by however the state feels like they should, and all these other problems that come about with civil unions being sanctioned by the state, we'll let them have it. But can you see, am I wrong in saying that attitude is kind of doesn't jive with and I don't want to get right on drugs, but that's why I'm asking this. I listened to some of your ideas on drug legalization or not, and I really am trying to pinpoint, because you're saying now libertarian. Where are you coming from? But so my host, my co-hosts are going to say I went all over. So let's just stick with the gay marriage question if we can.
Okay, so like a libertarian social order would be like the ideal. You know, it's an ideal to point towards, but we are organized in nation states, in social democracies. And therefore, like, I don't think it's too hypocritical to kind of campaign or push for, you know, the kind of society you want to see. Like, in a libertarian social order, it's made up of villages, towns, and cities all forming because they have shared values, they agree on a contract. And you know, this doesn't exist, of course, and they can exclude whoever they want from their community, and they accept whoever they want from their community. So it's like Wild Wild West, but with modern technology. And you've got a sign outside, and they could put whatever they want. This kind of thing, actually, like these kind of things do exist here and there. Like in Switzerland, for instance, you've got there was actually a story, quite an amusing one, that came out. A woman was denied citizenship in Switzerland because her neighbors found her veganism annoying. And it's absolutely true that if you want to become a citizen in Switzerland, you have to get a certain number of people who are already citizens to vouch for you and say, yep, this person's great, and there's a process, and you go through like panel interviews or whatever with community leaders, and you have to bring forward witnesses who are already citizens to say this person's good and that person isn't. So in a libertarian social order, if they were like, you know what, we don't allow homosexuality here, or we don't allow this, or we don't allow that, they would be able to say it, and you would move on to another community that would allow that kind of lifestyle. And the basic idea from Hopper is that homosexuality is just one type of behavior that leads to short-sightedness, because it's not about building families. It's not about so you know, short-sightedness would be seen as like the enemy of civilization building, and that's why, you know, if you're going to have a libertarian social order and you're going to actually build your own stuff and you're not going to rely on government, you need people with long-sighted thinking to maintain it. So therefore, any behaviors that encourage short-sightedness or high time preference are not desirable, basically.
No, that's fair enough. So what you're basically saying is that though you wouldn't actually be necessarily interested in having those around you, you're not saying they can't exist, you just wouldn't want them in that type of area that you're around. You say go off and do your own thing. Well,
I wouldn't want them celebrated. You know, it's not like I hate gay people or anything like that. It's yeah, I just think the celebration of it is not particularly healthy or convivial. You know, for it doesn't. What's the right word? Sorry, it's 4 a.m. here, chaps. Yeah. So you know, it's not something like I'm particularly passionate about. Like, yeah, let's persecute the gays. You know, no, I'm not really that bothered. You know, but at the moment, what we have,
that makes more sense. That makes more sense. The fact that you're not completely bothered.
We have right now like a system that encourages minority group status, so you can be a recipient of state benefits, and gays and not so much gays anymore. Now they're kind of, you know, they're not really seen as victims that much anymore. But now we have the transgenders and the non-binaries, and I mean, God knows, there's like, you know, there's like 125 new identities now to say, oh, look, you know, I'm oppressed, you've got to do this, I need this speech code and this and this and that. So that, for me, from like a perspective of caring about liberty, just doesn't jive with me at all. I really don't like it. And I think that it's also just in the transgender stuff, that there's a lot of really unhealthy things going on, especially when it comes to how pediatricians are now treating children. So yeah, these kind of things, I think, I know that people probably accuse me of making a slippery slope argument. But I think they are kind of related. These things. I think that there's enough evidence to say, yeah, if you start celebrating gay marriage, especially in a social democracy, then you will lead to, well, here's the next group, and here's the next group, and here's the next group that need this and this and this and this.
No, I agree with you to a point with the LGBT community where they're going on with the 150 different genders and things like that. I definitely agree with you on that point. I think it's more of a difference on our opinions on that one, and I think we should probably move on to a little point on that one, because everybody's going to feel slightly different about that. We've all got different views, and that's definitely not the reason why we brought you on to argue the toss on that one, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about gay marriage? Why don't you just tell me quickly? You're totally.
I'm totally fine with gay marriage. I mean, like what you said, as long as it's not put in my face, I don't really care what anybody does. As long as it doesn't affect me and doesn't hurt me, I don't care.
Yes, I think like when it comes to homosexuality, like it's not the optimal state of being for a man to be gay. Like it's not as normal and fantastic as a lot of people suggest. But that doesn't mean like it's the worst thing in the world. And I still think, in your bedroom, whatever, you do what floats your boat. If you want to live, that way, then whatever.
I suppose, being the arbiter, I suppose that you could say that the argument is that it's normal to them. Though it's not normal to us, it's normal to them. Now, that's not to go on to the different points of transgenderism and all those type of points, because that's a completely different issue. But on the aspect of being gay or homosexual or lesbian itself, we already know that that's a sexual preference. So it's a case of them being an actual themselves and just acting out as themselves.
I have a couple of friends who've sort of decided to go gay.
That's quite weird.
Recently. Yeah. So two guys who've just decided to go bi, and then another bloke who's just gone gay. Like, and I was like, is this a choice? And it seems to me like, for these gentlemen anyway, they are failures in the dating game. They live in London, and apparently dating there is savage. And you can get laid quite easily on Tinder. But if you actually want to meet a woman, you'll get asked, how much do you earn on a first date, things like that. And women, just this is going by what my friends have said, they're quite entitled and rude. And so, yeah, they've I don't know, they've got needs, and they've decided to bat for the other team.
So kind of like being a what would you call it? Obviously, you've got a trender bender. You've also got the fact of it being a case of something else. I think what we'll do is I think we'll leave this conversation here, to be honest. I think we'll move on to another point, which is quite interesting, I think, personally. How do you feel about the whole aspect of immigration in itself?
In itself, it's like if a community consents to taking in anybody that they want, like, I don't have a problem with it. My main problem with it is it's what I would call enforced integration in England at the moment. Mass immigration is destroying working class communities, and I just think it's a complete violation of their rights to self-determination, and it's deeply immoral. That's really how I feel about it. Just really, really immoral. Like, you look at Newham in London, which used to be the East End. I don't know if you guys caught that documentary, The Last Whites of the East End, but it used to be, I think in just like 1995, it was like 92% ethnic Brit, and they're all Cockneys. And I don't know about you guys, but there's a special place in my heart for Cockneys. They like represent something very English, and they're
dying. Don't they all live within the sound of a certain chapel's bells? I know I learned something about Cockneys. Is that what I learned? Am I remember that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think that is true. I'm not sure.
Bells.
Say it again, Brett.
Is it Bow Bells?
Yes, yeah, Bow Bells. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And they're tough. They're a tough lot, They got their own way of speaking and way of doing. I'm sorry, I piped up there. I really don't have much to say. Yes, there's a soft spot even for us Americans, us Yank lads, for Cockneys. There's something about them, their swagger, who they are, that we all love.
Yeah. Well, what's his name? Michael. Oh,
Oh, I thought you were
God.
going to say Ginger Baker of the Cream, because he's the best Cockney ever.
The actor from the Italian Job.
Michael Caine.
Oh,
Michael
yeah.
Caine. Michael Caine. So he used to affect a Cockney accent in some of his movies. Yeah, it's iconic. Anyway, that's gone. Basically, they're gone. And the documentary it was actually put out by the BBC, which is very interesting that they would decide to make this, given it kind of goes against the diversity is our strength mantra. And these people are saying things like, I feel I've been ethnically cleansed. They say things like that. And, oh, my daughter can't go to that school. That's an Asian school now. We can't go in here, blah, 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 blah. All their businesses being taken over, all their institutions gone. So, yeah, it's very sad, I think. And I think it's deeply immoral to do that to a community. In a sense, I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, given like we've lost no one really owns anything in England. I mean, in terms of property rights, they're just violated routinely. The government pretty much runs everything, don't they? They're in control of schools and hospitals and courts and laws and roads and everything and everything and everything. So I suppose maybe it shouldn't surprise us that now they've got to communities and they're just like, yeah, you can't choose who lives here. Deal with it.
Wouldn't that be the case of... Go on.
No, go ahead.
No. Go on, Britisher. You carry on.
Well, when it comes to a place like the East End, I mean, has there ever really been a choice as to who lived there?
No. Well, I suppose in a sense, no. But
because I mean, I think, you know, at one point the Jews were a very big community within the East End. I mean, there was a famous Battle of the East End with Mosley's black shirts, wasn't there? And then I think prior to that, somewhere in the 19th century, the East End was pretty much overrun by German immigrants for some reason.
Yep, it was.
So in that regard, I think the East End, you know, we have a sort of traditionalist view of the East End, but I think that particular place, because it's in a way the cheap end of London, has in a way always been the place where kind of, you know, the immigrants congregated that came in. I think what is different now is just the scale of it, really, as opposed to, you know, but already previously there were very, very large immigrant waves into the East End.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Britisher. So, you know, but yes, the scale of it is utterly destructive now, isn't it? And just so transformative so quickly. Just going back to that stat, the fact that in the 90s they were like over 90% of the people there were you know, identified as ethnic Brits, and now that's 16%. And you think, what's happened, and how can that be justified? Yeah,
well,
since 1997, things changed.
I think it's not just happened in London. I think it's happened pretty much with many inner cities.
Yeah.
Yes, and a lot of smaller northern towns as well, which you almost wouldn't expect. I mean, Bradford's not that much of a big place.
Yeah, but as I say, if you think of it in terms of anywhere, I mean, you know, the United States of America obviously was a traditional immigrant country in that regard. It's particularly in modern times, if you are an immigrant, the place you head to is the city, because that is a place where you hope to find occupation, so to speak. You're not really going to head out into the land. So that huge wave of Catholic Irish that came into Northern America, they all headed for the cities. Whereas their compatriots, the Protestant Irish that had kind of entered 1 or 2 centuries earlier, they had actually settled out on the land when, in a way, the land was being settled, so to speak, when you could go to America and hope for a parcel of land. But the later, the more modern immigration, that happened into the cities. And I think that is, in a way, the pattern that we're seeing repeated, that basically, if you are an immigrant and you head somewhere, you are not going to head for some village in the middle of nowhere. You're going to head for the population centers.
Yeah, it's also the type of immigrant is totally different these days too. Or the type of immigrant that's causing trouble and that people are complaining about.
Oh, I mean,
it's not the same as the arrival of the French in, what was it, the 1600s? When we had a wave of them. I think it's very different.
Yeah, I think those were the Huguenots, weren't they?
Yeah. Farage is descended from them. Yeah.
It's always a question of what can you actually integrate. I think that's mainly what that seems to be the subject that one kind of is playing with here.
Yeah, definitely.
One is looking at lots of these Eastern Europeans, particularly the Poles, who came in huge numbers into Britain. The scale of it within a very short time seemed to be too much, but nonetheless, there didn't seem to be any doubt that over time one would be able to integrate them. I think if it's a matter of people from Syria, Somalia, and Pakistan, that is where the worry is. Well, hang on a moment. How do we actually integrate these people?
Yeah.
We can't. I think. Sorry, go on, Common Sense.
I was just about to say that, just to give a sort of an idea for people, since 2015, over 300, and I'll just use the blunt figure of 300,000 people a year were emigrating to come to the country. That's not how many left. That's not how many were going in and out. That's how many stayed.
Net immigration.
Yeah, and that was over 300,000, and that's been happening for the last 3 years, and it's still going up at this point in time now. So to put that in perspective, that's the city of Birmingham coming in every year.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that 300,000, you have 50 million people, 60 million maybe at the most.
65 million.
65.7 at the minute.
That's a substantial. Wow.
Yes.
Say that one more time, Common Sense, so I make sure I heard you right.
For over 300,000 a year net. Last year, I think it was 368, I believe.
Yeah.
Where are you going to put all these people? Here's the thing, boys, if I may, just very quickly as I listen to this. People are going to call folks Nazis. People are going to call me a Nazi for what I say. Nazis wouldn't have me because of my lineage. But here's the fact. If folks are going to come in and assimilate, we talk about the differences. The differences are this. In 1950, when you got a bunch of Irish people moving into your neighborhood, I'm not saying crime wouldn't go up sometimes if there was a lot of poverty involved or whatever, and maybe it did. Maybe you could look at some bad things. But these people came in, what you got mostly was haggis being sold or whatever they eat. You know, you got things that revolved around their culture to a small extent, but definitely by the second generation, you have assimilated human beings that are now, for all intents and purposes, Americans. You have parents the immigrants themselves, parents of that first generation American that want to be American so bad that they're more patriotic than your standard issue American citizen. That's not happening with certain groups of people. Dare I say that I can see it happening in Dearborn, Michigan, a city not too far from where I live now. And I can see that if I was to I was talking to Welshmere Stories, who loves to bandy around words like Nazi, because people have different ideas. And I love you, Welshmere. We'll talk about it one day. But here's the thing. If I take a sign down there and say Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven, I don't care who's offended by that. This is United States. I may be offended by that sign. Who cares? If I try to take that into Dearborn right now, I mean, you can just type in Dearborn, Michigan, Christians get pelted by rocks. The cops are there saying, you started it. You don't start it. You don't get a violent reaction with words or symbolic speech in the United States. That's our First Amendment. Look, I don't want to suck up all the wind out of the room. I'm just going to say, I'm going to quote John Cleese. When you walk through London and you look around and there's no Englishman, you have to ask yourself, what's going on?
Yeah.
I suppose you could...
It's not an English city anymore, which is absolutely on point. It's a horrible place to be, actually, I find. But yeah, it's completely transformed. It's over 50% minority group now. So not English in any meaningful sense.
No. I mean, that moves on to...
I mean, am I the only one that would even speak to that? And I don't know if I'm carrying it off topic. I've just been doing a lot of listeners here. TheBritisher is too, so maybe we're getting our gears ground up. But I don't want to be called, because xenophobic. Listen, that is actually a thing. Homophobic is not a thing. It's a made-up word. There is no, that I know of, irrational, unexplainable fear of homosexuality. Maybe there, and I take that back. I'm sure there is, because there are people that are terrified of you name it. But to throw around things like that, and now we have, if I'm gonna say what I just said, and I was even careful to use London because I'm an American. If I'm gonna say what then I'm gonna be called a Nazi, a racist, a bigot, a xenophobe, as if I'm terrified. Let's remember the definition of that. As if I am terrified, unreasonably horrified of someone else's culture, of a different culture than mine. You know, come on. I mean, it's getting old, and we can't. And by we, I mean humanity. The Muslims also, they did not like it. The Ottoman, oh man, look, I'm going to keep babbling, boys. So I'll just stop right there. But I really want to hear, especially if you have anything to say on that, on the offensive. And I, will, for one, will not call you a Nazi, sir, no matter what your ideas are.
Yeah. Well, perhaps you should be scared if your community is becoming Islamic. I think that's pretty reasonable. Offenses of all crimes are going up a lot. We didn't used to have acid attacks, for instance. These are a new phenomena. So
up 300% from last year, 350% from last year.
Yeah, while you were talking, Ogo, I was trying to find that there was a good image that the Sun put out which showed all of these crimes going up. The only one that they put out which was slightly misleading were the increases in rape and sexual assault, because obviously reporting that's just skyrocketed as well, as we know with all the Me Too stuff. Excuse me. So, but yes, basically knife crime and all other kinds of violent assault have dramatically increased. So maybe you should be scared of that. And I'd also say that it's a pretty reasonable fear to just to think like, oh, we're not going to be in charge of the village shop anymore, or our church is going to close down and be replaced by a mosque. I'm not sure if fear is the right reaction, but those are legitimate concerns that people have, because people care about their communities deeply. And yeah, I mean, okay, that's pretty much all I have to say on that, I suppose.
Well, and when you have a group of people saying that, I've seen it on BBC television. It wasn't the news, I don't believe, but I'm watching a BBC broadcast, rebroadcast, or wherever it may have been that I was watching it. It generated on permit paying British people and the government paying for this. And the man was like, Chowdhury, I can't remember what his name was. Chowdhury, I want to say. And he said, oh, Buckingham Palace is going to be a mosque.
Yeah.
What? I'm not even English, and I mean, yes, I don't want to get all.
Chowdhury was very much someone who was deliberately provocative. I mean, he was a militant who was connected with terrorism. That's why eventually he went to prison. But he was very much someone who loved to be the hate figure in the media. He kind of thrived on that. So he, in a way, what he was doing by saying Buckingham Palace is going to be a mosque is in a way the same thing as Milo Yiannopoulos was doing when he said feminism is cancer. I mean, he was deliberately kicking a hornet's nest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to make a quick point before we move on. Would you say that this is all to do from political ideologies, or would you say that this is to do with just the way that people are? I mean, would you, for instance, on the offensive, or Hugh, would you blame the fact that Tony Blair brought in so many immigrants and opened up immigration to a point where so many people were coming in so he could get there to vote, so to speak? Or would you blame it on the left in itself and the new ideologies that are coming forward? Or is this just a wave that's coming through Europe?
Well, I don't know how many people have come in under Theresa May, but prior to her anyway, David Cameron had brought more immigrants to Britain than any other prime minister.
If I could just interject, Theresa May was Home Secretary in charge of immigration whilst David Cameron was Prime Minister.
Yes, of course. But I think, he was the boss. So I'll blame him primarily. Anyway, yeah. So left or right in terms of British mainstream politics, they both seem pretty enthusiastic. So, can we blame Tony Blair? Yeah, I mean, he deserves some of the blame. I feel like all the incentives are in the wrong place, though. It's beneficial to both sides for them to do this. It's only really for the everyday Brit that this isn't helping us out. So, you know, while these incentives remain in place, I don't know if the ideology is just required to justify it. I think that they want to do it for other reasons. Like, who was talking? Was it Common Senseguy? You said, you know, because they want the votes, right? They want the immigrants who are going to vote for them. And the corporatists want the cheap labor. So it's going to happen, you know.
Yeah, but the reason, sorry, I'll just say this quick point and then please carry on. You say that it's to do with the corporatists, but the corporatists are not part of a political ideology. They're only part of capitalism. You could interject and say, well, that's political, but technically it's not. So you'd only say that the left would actually have the ideology rather than the right, so to speak, because it's to do with the bankers, as you said before, the capitalists.
Yeah, the corporatists might, you know, you're talking about capitalists. When I said corporatists, I was referring to, you know, politicians who care about business, big business interests, and who have friends in big business and who make relationships, and big businessmen make relationships with them. And I'm sure there's a lot of corruption going on. You know, our country is not immune from that. And these people donate to political parties and host politicians, and they say, look, my company is going to go down if you change the law, and this town's going to go bankrupt without people like me. And, you know, what about, do you want a campaign donation? And then, of course, these politicians, when they leave office, they go into the private sector and make millions and millions of pounds giving speeches at banks and giving speeches at big companies. So I think, yeah, those incentives exist. It is generally beneficial as a politician in Britain to not want to cut immigration. And I'm quite cynical about them. I know there are some of them who are nice and their heart's in the right place and they do care about the country. I think once you're in that world, to get to the top, you have to be quite a nasty character on the whole. And you have to know how to play the game. And I think being pro-immigration, or at least behind closed doors being pro-immigration, is part of it. Something you have to kind of do.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason why I actually ask is because there must be an ideology in itself. I'm not sure if it's left, right, centre, or whatever, but there must be an ideology that we all sort of thrive to. As you said before, the multiculturalism idea, that was obviously a leftist idea through Marxism.
Yes.
So
yeah,
multiculturalism
is like, sorry for interrupting.
No, I was just going to say, wouldn't that be the point of what I was trying to get at, that it would be through the left as an ideology, or would it be something else? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what you would think would be the ideology that would be leading the actual acceptance of immigration. Yeah,
that is definitely left-wing, liberal, utopian, egalitarian nonsense, isn't it? The huge amounts of people in Britain who just think all people are the same, we're all basically the same, you know, and they might know, if they sat down to think about it for a moment, that not all cultures are equal, that people are actually different country to country, nation to nation, state to state, that there are significant differences between human beings and different groups and different cultures and ways of life, and that if you chucked all those together, it's probably not a good idea. But yeah, I think it's easier not to confront those ideas. Yeah, I used to be a leftist. I used to be a liberal, and it was really just by not asking questions. It's a very easy ideology to buy into if you don't want to think about things too much, because it's nice, you know. It's not. It's all the answers are nice. Resources are infinite. Everyone's the same. Basically, if we educate people and the rich pay their taxes, everything will be all right. So, yes, there is an ideology there which perhaps doesn't lend itself, well, definitely doesn't lend itself to generating political will in Britain. And also, whenever anyone comes out, it seems like they just get immediately pounced on. What was her name? Anne-Marie Waters is called far right. She's called all of these things. She's actually quite left on a lot of things, but, you know, says that Islam isn't good for the country, which I think is a very obvious and shouldn't be a controversial thing to say at all. But yeah, she gets completely thrown under the bus and demonized. So yes, Britain's socially liberal attitude is not helping things.
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, does anybody else have any questions?
Well, one question I would have, that is regarding something you just said before, Common Sense, and that is that multiculturalism is Marxist. Can you elaborate on that? Because I don't quite see the connection.
Some people would say that cultural Marxism is a Marxist theory because of trying to forcibly integrate people by saying that these people are the same as us, or by the point of saying that Muslims are the oppressed and we as the oppressors need to accept them so they are no longer oppressed.
Yes, but what I mean is that didn't really, none of that really referred to multiculturalism, did it?
Yeah, it means that they have to perpetuate the Muslim belief and the Muslim faith because they are oppressed.
Okay, but multiculturalism would refer to many cultures.
Yes, I understand that. But you asked me a specific question and I'm giving you an answer for the question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
The similarity that I see is the way that communism turns you into an economic slave, and it robs you of your self-determination that way. But multiculturalism robs you of. It's a much harder thing to define what it robs a nation of, but in a very similar way, it takes away people's right to self-determination, and I think it's also it's a revolt against nature. It's not natural. You know, Marxism or communism fails because people are naturally competitive, and this egalitarian, this absolute totalitarian egalitarian social order is just counter to human nature. It doesn't jive. It doesn't work. You know, and I think that's the same with multiculturalism. Most of the people who are in favor of it live in homogenous communities. They're middle to upper class, sort of bourgeoisie, you know, well-off people, and they, oh, isn't it lovely? I love the food. They're like that, and they never really have to face the reality of it. But anybody who's really subjected to this stuff and sees their town turn into 50% Pakistani in 2 decades or whatever, and suddenly girls are being raped left, right, and center, and there's violence and tension between communities, and the call to prayer starts to be a really big deal for you. These people get that this is completely unnatural. It doesn't make any sense that such totally different people with different outlooks and people that want to live total different lives should be living together and forced to do so. And if they speak out against it, then they're somehow evil and a deficient human being. This is very unnatural.
Well, yeah, but I mean, how much has that actually got to do with a weakness of national identity as opposed to some kind of ideology?
Because the reason why is because the ideology is perpetuating the fact that we have to be accepted as a Muslim faith. That's the point of the Marxist theory, to be the fact that the Muslims are being the oppressed, and us as the oppressors have to accept them, and by accepting them, we have to perpetuate them to the forefront of the grounds, so they get the best stuff.
That is the ideology.
Exactly.
That is yeah, but I mean, that is what you class as being the ideology. But what I'm saying is, you know, to what extent do we actually believe that that is the real cause of what is happening, as opposed to just simply a failure of existing national identities simply to assert themselves?
But no, because you can't have a failure of nationalistic. You can't have a failure of a nationalistic point of view when we are told not to portray our nationalistic points of view, and it's suppressed. That's to do with ideology. And then you have to perpetuate an ideology on the other side saying we should accept Muslims and bring them forward.
Yes, but because that ideology exists, that does not necessarily mean that that is the reason why the failure within national identity is occurring.
Okay, so what would you say it is then?
I would say it is pretty. You know, it is just as much seen in. I think there was a video which was very indelicately titled by Hugh, in which Mark Zuckerberg was referring to young people all seeing themselves as citizens of the world,
Yeah, great video. Yes.
And I think that is, to my mind, that is not ideology. I don't think they think that because they've been indoctrinated with some ideology.
Why do they think that then?
Yeah,
Sorry.
why on earth would they think that?
Sorry, you were just about to explain it, and I was like, well, why do they think it then? Okay, go on, sir. Sorry.
I see it more as it being an erosion, a gradual erosion of nationalist sentiment.
Yeah, but
basically, what has always been, well, in a way, pretty much rebellion against previous generations. It's very simple for one generation to rebel against the values of the the previous generation. I don't necessarily see this as an issue of indoctrination. I can well imagine that within the political class, it is indoctrination, but I'm not really sure if within this sort of airy-fairy youth that is jumping about and saying, "Oh, how wonderful it all is," I'm not necessarily sure that that is really indoctrination, that they're following some ideology to the letter. I see it more as the fact that kind of the idea of Britishness, or the idea of Frenchness, or to a certain degree the idea of Americanness, but not yet to such a degree in America, has been weakened. And that therefore, if you ask these people, what is Britishness, what is Frenchness, what is Americanness, that is when you will get a very long because they simply just don't know how to define it.
Yeah, I think that two quick things. A revolt, a rebellion is a phase. It doesn't last. Teenagers, they like to rebel, then they grow out of it. And most people, I think, are naturally conformist to an extent. I mean, you have to be to survive. So within any society, you have to conform to things. And usually you grow out of your rebellion stage. So there's definitely an ideology at play. And I think it's post-World War II, nationalism was seen as the big bad boogeyman that's responsible for all wars. Got to get rid of nationalism. Globalism comes in. Multiculturalism comes with that. And you push this idea that being even now it seems like if you're too patriotic, you're a racist, and that's really bad. I don't think it would have really mattered if you were a racist. People wouldn't have given a shit that we weren't living in a multicultural society. It didn't really matter.
I mean, one of the reasons why there is
language, there's this whole new morality, and there's a whole new way that you're supposed to think of yourself and talk and feel about the world. That is highly regulated. It's highly regulated through public schools. I mean, the state school system, and yeah, it's by the media and by political correctness. This is definitely all. I think you said, well, what's the ideology behind multiculturalism, and what about weakness of identity? But weakness of identity is part of the new ideology. It's part of the new outlook of how you have to think of yourself.
Well, if I can just answer one or two points there. First off, I think one of the reasons why calling people fascists or Nazis who are very patriotic, I think one of the reasons for that is because, of course, Nazis and fascists have traditionally hidden behind patriotism. But when it comes to revolutions and such being mere phases, one couldn't really say that about the cultural changes that came about in, say, the 1960s.
No. Just to clarify, you did say it was the youth rebelling against their...
But precisely. So basically, youthful rebellion that you see within a decade may not necessarily just be a phase which then just disappears because they're 5 years older now and they've got steady jobs. Because that did not necessarily happen with what happened in the 1960s.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I suppose so. But that's why I would say it's more than just a youth rebellion. It's more than that. They've been taught, they've been convinced that their outlook is better than the old. Nationalism is seen as archaic and dangerous. So hence you can't have a national identity.
Well, I think it's just one of those things where I think we'll have to differ. But I can see where I can see where you're coming from. But
speaking of a nationalistic ideology, what about the problems with the EU in general, or the fact that we're all classified as Europeans?
You're on an island. You're not European.
Yeah, it's still classified as European.
Yes.
They can classify you how they want, but the fact remains you're on a relatively medium to medium large island in the ocean. You're not European.
I mean, isn't that from what we were? Yeah, that's fine. I mean, from what we were just talking about before, from a nationalistic ideology, wouldn't that be an ideology itself, saying that we are no longer English or anything else like that, or we're no longer British, we are European? Isn't that isn't that part of an ideology, or is that just something that I'm just thinking?
The British are
I'm not sure, because an ideology usually tends to be something, you know, regarding political ideals or you know, such a thing.
Well, not always. What about a religious ideology? It doesn't have to be political. It's just a set of ideals that you follow by.
Okay,
that's an
but
ideology.
This would be one particular idea. I mean,
Did you not see the lack of national identity and the belief that all peoples are equal, and you don't see those things as sort of being related at all?
Is there a relativism setting in regarding the various values of civilizations? But I'm not really sure whether one could apply that in the idea of Europe.
Well, you can when you're allowing a bunch of people look at. I'm sorry. Well,
no,
I mean,
carry on.
I would just pile on, and I very much agree with on the offensive. I wonder how people can make these arguments that sound like maybe they've never taken a look at what's going on around them, and I just stand amazed. I'm not a racist, but no, you can't. Societies are vastly different. In the society where unchecked people are coming from right now, if a person doesn't have pubic hair, the Sharia courts say it's not rape if you forcibly have sex with them because they're not a man or a woman. And the Quran only talks about forcible rape with a man or a woman, or adultery with a man or a woman. And so they come from a cult. I'm not making this up. I know people that live there. The boy that I raised was raped by a man. That's normal. When his dad spoke up and they ended up having something done by the Israeli authorities that were in the area, because the Muslims wouldn't have done anything, they were like, they kind of hated him then, because it's like, well, that's just what we do here. I shouldn't laugh. I laugh because people think, oh, what? No, there are societies much better. The West is the best society. To be ashamed of that, you're crazy. To have people come to allow someone to come to a person say you shouldn't be proud of this thing that you're a part of, and you shouldn't be patriotic. That is part of the changing of ideals that have made people weak and easy to manipulate and only want to think about the easy answers, as I heard Mr. Offensive, what I want to say, but Hugh say earlier. And look, like I said, I could go on forever on this, but I think that all it takes is a little bit of common sense. Open your eyes, look around, and don't try to, wear rose-colored glasses. If you do all those things, it's pretty obvious what's going on right now.
I'm trying.
I know I threw that in on purpose, but that's my 2 cents on this whole deal right there on that part.
I think that you're right about the comment you made on ideals. Their ideal for your sort of typical liberal millennial Brit or whatever is an inclusive, open society. It is not a society defined, it's not a society defined by nationalist identity at all. They're not even they're not even a fan of borders. And I had these two mates who lived in Europe. Both of them campaigned heavily for Remain, and they sent out emails, and their emails said things like, life is going to get so tough for us. We're going to have to get visas. We really want to live in Paris. It's so great here. Blah, 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 blah. And these were their priorities. These were the things they thought about: convenience, living a cosmopolitan lifestyle. And I think that there has to be a sort of, for you to just say, you know what, the future of the country should be decided on my convenience. I don't want to get a work permit. So, you know, please vote Remain. Just to be able to say that, and for people to think that that's normal, it requires some sort of ideological programming, or a predominant narrative at the least, that justifies that kind of behavior.
Or would you say that it's more of a fact of not necessarily looking at it from an ideological point of view, but maybe as a selfish point of view, and then just going with a political view that aligns with your selfish views?
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah,
People do vote in their own self-interest, don't they? So maybe you're right.
And I tell you, when I was listening to you just a second ago, you said inclusive and open. Let's remember, that's newspeak. That is a stolen meaning. That is a hijacked meaning. My society that I live in now is and always has been inclusive and open. We just are not always tolerant of people that want to come in and not assimilate. We did not assimilate to the Indians that were here. The Algonquins were here. They were actually the Mishigamis, right where I sit right now. We didn't assimilate to their ways and their culture. I don't see any of them anywhere near here. None. Even at the casino where they're supposed to own it, I don't see no Indians there. They ain't got no wigwams. I don't see no ho, and you know, no. Anyway, so let's just remember. I want to say, you know, you can remember what you want, but I would say take a good look. And the meaning of words has been slowly hijacked, slowly changed in an Orwellian fashion until inclusive and open means you let Muslims come in and blare the call to prayer 5 times a day and let them use some excuse of, well, the old church bells chime every hour. It's a bloody clock telling you what time it is. It's not, ho, 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 I love, when you got to get up in the morning. And it's,
yeah. Yeah. No, I will. Just going back, you know, earlier I was talking about forced integration. All these immigrants are completely uninvited, and I don't really see the meaningful difference between losing your town by being displaced and just invasion. You know, it seems to me like very, you know, large areas of England have been invaded. Basically, they're not England anymore. They're Pakistan, Somalia, or whatever.
Can I ask a question here? Because it seemed just before, from, you know, Common Sense was sort of beginning to segue into a different subject, regard, you know, into Europe and whatever. So before we go there, what does anybody actually envisage as a solution here?
Well, that is a very tough question.
Well, I still have the paper right here, Britt. It's right here. We came up with them. Remember, Jeremy was here. We've got quotas. We've got assimilation, a long process where you learn the language and everything else. We got faith schools should end. That was yours, Britt. Remember, faith schools should end. Work to be here. That was that came from Doppelganger way back in the day. We actually came up with 5 things, Britt, that were really good. And I mean, there could be a lot of other answers, but all of the answers we came up with, bro, are not only things that we've been talking about right now, but we would be called more and more progressively racist for saying those things, for saying, no, to become a citizen, it should take you 8-10 years. You should know the language. If you remember, Jeremy talked about having the families that would volunteer to have, and it would be a volunteer basis to have immigrants, and people would do that. I know so many people here that would do that. Have immigrants come and stay with them, and so they could learn the culture, the food, the mores, the social norms, all these things. So anyway, I just remember that. I know you remember. This came on the card. This is the card that with the whiskey you sent me that long time ago. And I used this card to write that down, and I've never taken it off my desk. I just move it around because I loved our ideas on that. There are ways to combat it, Britt, and you came up with one of the best. Yours was in the faith schools. Don't show preference to one religion over the other. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm rather more radical because I do see multiculturalism as sort of it's an endpoint of social democracy. You'll just always get more groups in need of government handouts. You'll always, you know, that old adage, I don't know if it's an adage, am I using this word correctly? That A and B team up to rob C. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
quite a nice way of saying, you know, that democracy is not all about freedom and liberty. It's mob rule. It's not as morally justified as we all think. And I think that because you get these A and Bs able to rob C, you inevitably get D, E, and all these other bloody groups forming and all wanting to be recipients. And that just grows and grows. That's the incentives. That's the nature of the system. So multiculturalism fits that perfectly. It's like the ultimate, let's make everyone dependent on government. I don't really think that things are going to get any better within our current political paradigm. I don't think that our politicians can fix this through, you know, you mentioned like getting rid of faith schools. I don't think that's going to make a difference. And basically, we have these people trying to undermine and subvert our way of life and take over our country. I think eventually deportations are going to have to happen. I know you guys are going to think that's really authoritarian, but I think that there's an ethical right that people have to form their own communities. And you can expel someone from your community. You can say, sorry, you're not welcome here anymore. We can't handle this.
Well, you could go by a different way on that aspect. Well, you're saying you could expel the person. You could quite easily say, are you working? Can you speak English? If that's no on both answers of the question, sorry, you're going to have to leave until you learn English. Or come back and get a job.
You can make
there are ways of working around it.
Yeah, you can make the standards whatever you want. I mean, you know, if you have moral objections to the criteria, you know, that should be a discussion that should be had. But I really doubt our politicians are going to help us out on this one. They love what's going on. The more social conflict there is, the more people call for them to fix it, and then they can start a new program over here. Oh, let's open yet another anti-discrimination board, or let's do a social cohesion drive in this community. We'll build this, we'll do that, we'll tax you a bit more. So it all works out pretty nicely for them. I don't think they're going to fix it by ending faith schools or whatever other measure. That would just be a token to the public to hopefully keep things rolling on, to keep the wheels of multiculturalism nicely greased.
My ogre sense is telling me that Britisher has something to say. I may be wrong.
Well, I just don't see how practical deportations are. I mean, you may be able to deport people who have come in recently, but you know, from given the language you use about invasions and, you know, huge figures over the last years, I mean, those people are settled. They now have children who are more than likely born here. So basically, you are looking at deporting people who effectively would be British nationals. How do you do that?
I can't answer the technicalities of this. I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't know. But again, I do think that the British people have an ethical right to do this, to be able to choose who can live in our country. And
I think he meant ethically. I really honestly think he meant ethically. And am I wrong, Brett? When you said how does one do that, I don't think you meant the mechanisms and lawyers and whatnot. I think you were making a point to some of these people would be British. And so if you could answer that, if you care to, is that what the question was, Brett? Because I'm curious too about that one.
Well, I mean, it was effectively on both sides. I mean, it's both the technical side of it, but it's also the fact of, well, hang on a moment, if they're born here, where are you going to send them to? I mean, you know, for somebody who's never been to Pakistan, who doesn't speak a word of Pakistani, but whose grandparents were Pakistani, are you really going to send them to Pakistan?
Well, it's a case-by-case basis, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I mean, in that case, we're already...
There are plenty of people. I sense that this is going well. I feel like this is about outliers. We have entire ghettos of people who don't speak English, who are born in England. They don't eat English foods. They can't speak English. They go to a school where everybody else comes from where they come from. They're not British. I don't care what it says in their passport. That's been provided by a government that I don't think is legitimate at all. So
Do you think that the Pakistanis would accept them if we would send them back?
Huh?
Do you think the Pakistanis would accept them if we sent them back?
Yeah, I don't think it would take very long for them to settle down there.
Well, no, I'm not talking about that. I mean, would the Pakistanis, basically for one country to basically export a population, it would effectively need for the other country to be willing to accept that population. Now, if the other country just goes, no, we're not having them, then what are you going to do?
Well, that's an interesting problem. But I think they probably would have them. Don't we provide Pakistan with nuclear weapons, military training, aid, you know, millions and millions of dollars or pounds, sorry, every year? So I think we
don't provide nuclear weapons.
No nuclear weapons.
We don't provide them nuclear weapons, but we do provide training in the others. No, we don't.
Maybe aid. Maybe you could trace it through some weird way and say that some money that was given in aid or food. No one gives. They have their own program, I believe.
Yeah, they built their own program.
But here's the thing. It fluttered out of my head. I actually had something there on the offensive, but just fluttered out of my head. This is a very interesting topic. I would say that
they would want them as well because they're better educated than their local populace. It would be a boost to their local to their economy. And these people going back to settle in, you know, would they be able to settle in? I think it would be easier for them to settle in Pakistan than it is for them.
I'm sorry, it's going to fly out of my damn head again.
Go ahead.
Do you care if people know the country you're in, Hugh, or is that off the table?
No, go for it. I'm in Vietnam.
You do? Okay. So just because we're gonna do a little test here on air, I trust you'll either say I don't want to do it or see where I'm going with it, or we'll do it. Just to see, it's a hypocrite test. So you're in Vietnam, is that right?
Yeah.
Give me something. What's their most important holiday there? What's their most prized food? What food do you eat at a wedding? What's a wedding ceremony like, or a funeral ceremony? Say something small in their language, if you will. Or how long you been there? I guess I should have asked first before I went on all that. Have you been there for longer than maybe like 2 months or something? Have been there a bit?
Yeah. I've been here for like 8 years now.
Then all of those questions are more than relative. So, I mean, first, could you start out? Could you say anything like, "Good morning, sweetheart. What's for breakfast?"
Yeah, I can say, well, xin chào, khỏe không? You know, em yêu, đói bụng quá. It means, honey, I'm hungry.
But see, this is my nice way of saying, if you were not assimilating there, would you be okay, or would they come knock on your door and throw you out?
I have not assimilated, and I'll tell you why.
There you go. Thank you.
So I don't expect Pakistanis, Somalis, Sub-Saharan Africans, I don't expect them to integrate. I don't expect Europeans who come and live in England to integrate either. They won't. I just think it's not going to happen. They'll retain their culture. Cross-generational integration is possible with certain groups when you don't have a huge cultural clash and when you're not mass importing them to your country. But no, I'm not going to become Vietnamese. I'll always be English.
And I hope that wasn't too hardcore, man. I'm not going to apologize forever, but I want you to understand that where I'm coming from on this one too. Most of the time, I'm picking up what you're putting down, man. We're dancing the same tune, brother. Yeah. We're arm in arm walking to the Holy Land. But then when you get into this
on this living abroad thing, so yeah, I'm against immigration to England, but I'm an immigrant.
Well, when you get to the point where you talk about communities where they only speak Pakistani, whatever it is, Punjabi, whatever it is they speak, and when you get on that, and then Britisher makes the point that there are citizens, second generation. Now, in my humble opinion, at that point, one must do everything one can to encourage them to assimilate. Don't get me wrong. I think in the end, if they're constantly all of these horrible things we talked about tonight, I'm not going to belabor them. You know, as all of these things we talked about, if those don't start to come down, if we can't start to get along, maybe something should be done. But before anything like deportation, brother, I would hate it if they decided that you weren't Vietnamese enough. You seem like you're happy there. You must have a reason. I know you're married. Your wife's there. You love being there. You want to be there. You wouldn't be there. And I don't want to think about them throwing you out because you're not small and yellow enough, you know. Anyway, there you go. That's
let's say they did though. Let's say they did want to put me on a plane and get rid of me. You don't think that they have the right? This is not my.
Oh yes, no, I do. No, I think they have the right. You got me.
Yeah,
I do.
I'm a guest here. I need to make sure I don't step on anybody's toes. I have to be respectful. I take up their space on the roads. You know, and yeah, I try to be, you know, a nice member of the community. I know everybody in my neighborhood. You know, I mean, I'm like one of the only white guys. So,
but if you asked me the same question, and that question was pertaining to a child that you had there that spoke only English, but you and your wife had a child there, now I would not agree with you. I would say, well, at this point, I would even say that yes, they have the right to expel you, but not the mother and the child, because they're at that point citizens of that country. You see what I mean? And I know this is a big sticky thing, and I think it's hard for any of us, because the British and I right now, as I go through it in my head, it almost sounds like we're talking about feelings, but we're not. We're talking about nationally and national born human beings versus the rest.
No, I think these questions are not emotional at all. They're important and have to be discussed. Yes, okay, so there's a couple of important distinctions. Firstly, no one's being demographically displaced in Vietnam. There are no neighborhoods that are becoming English. That's not happening. So right now, at least, the Vietnamese do not feel infringed upon. They're not being violent or hostile to foreigners in their country. It's like 99.9999999% Vietnamese. You know, it's Vietnamese everywhere. They own everything. They are in total control. Their culture dominates, and that's the way they like it. I can't honestly see the government here going for a quick gain on any immigration of undesirable groups either, because this government makes 70-year plans and intends to have the support of the people, and they know that rests on appearing legitimate. So they don't want to mess with the culture. They do very little to sort of mess with it. If they ever enforce something, it's a very like traditional Vietnamese value. So yeah, should I be deported or my kid? I don't think that there's really any reason why they would. But let's say entire neighborhoods were becoming British, and that these British neighborhoods were the British people were routinely engaging in, you know, were routinely conflicting and getting in fights and whatnot with the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese were in an uproar about it, then we got a different situation. And at the end of the day, it's their country. It should never become British. And our country is becoming Islamic. So that's a big.
I think we got the hell out of that one. We really took the piss out of that, I think, is what you English boys say. So common sense. I'm not going to pipe in anymore on this, and I don't want to force this gentleman to Hugh to say anything more about it. I think you made some really good arguments.
I think it's what Oozaloo would say. You know, we pulled the spinach out of that one.
Yes, indeed, yes. Though I would like to make one point before we go forward. When Englishmen and English people go on holiday to Spain, for instance, we've already half assimilated all of the places that are there. If you go to Spain, you're going to eat English food. You're going to eat English, go to English pubs to drink. Is that not the same thing as what we're doing to Spain, as what Islam is doing over into England?
You're surely playing devil's advocate. You don't consider them equivalents, do you?
No, but shh.
There we go. They're not equivalent because, I mean, they're the vast difference between Islam and wherever Islam goes, it causes problems, doesn't it? Wherever it is, it seems like there's conflict. I mean, these people behave in terrible ways. They set up their barbaric law courts. They beat women. They put their women in bin liners. I mean, you know, I'm not like too pro the LGBT community agendas that we see today, but I'm not throwing people off roofs or saying, you know, homosexuals need to be killed. That's like a typical view. The idea that these groups will assimilate, I think, is fantasy. That I really don't think there's anything that can be done. Brits in Spain, again, are the Spanish upset about it? And what are the
no.
Actually, at times they are quite, yes.
Really?
Yeah, well, they
Yes.
can be.
Yes. Because the Brits can be quite rowdy over there, and there's lots of drinking and lots of people being sick in the streets, and
cultural damage. I mean, damage of buildings.
In some places, the Spanish are quite sick of them. Yes.
Is this because they have the sort of Club Med, like it's people going on holiday, or is it people living there?
No, it's not. It is the Club Med brigade that arrives and behaves like a bunch of Visigoths. Yes.
I watch old films of you lot going to war in the Falkland Islands, right? And it's just they've got these very regimented sailors and soldiers, because the Marines and the soldiers, of course, are on the ships. They're all going to the islands for their first, be deployed for first. Within 3 days being at sea and nothing to do, they got coconuts in their shirts to back boobies, and makeup on, and coming out and doing like drag shows. And then they throw, they're hurling these dudes up on blankets and they're fighting. And I mean, it's just, they're showing shots at the top of the ship. And it's like, what on earth? And there's the what am I trying to say? The officers are there. They're probably participating. So anyway, I don't know. Cultures are cultures, but yeah, you British folks are a rowdy lot when you don't have nothing to do. Y'all get up to the gurning, and I mean, you name it. The whole strongman contest, that's English. It comes from Scotland anyway, right? And you have the Highland Challenge. That's what y'all do. Raise hell.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I brought up.
Sorry.
No, carry on. You were responding to a point. Carry on.
Yeah, on the Spanish question, it should be left up to the Spanish people. They're going to weigh up the benefits, the economic benefits of having a booming tourist industry in a country that is struggling to get by, and dealing with these annoying people who come on holiday and get drunk, and having to police that and clear up after them and all of that. So the decision there's on them. But again, I can't see holidaymakers causing havoc in certain areas which are set up specifically to entertain tourists as being the same as Bradford. And one day England as well, they predict sometime between 2050 and 2070, the whole country being a majority Islamic country. I don't think these are moral equivalents at all. And I do think the Brits have an absolute right to determine our future.
Well, obviously, you say about the Brits determining their future. What about all the stuff that's happening in the EU at the moment? As in, for instance, obviously, stuff going on in Germany, as in the G20 attacks, or what you say, riots, that type of thing. Stuff happening in Sweden and stuff like that. What would be your views on that, if you have any?
Well, I think the EU is completely illegitimate, and I can't wait for the whole thing to crash down and collapse. That's my hope.
Before you go any further, I'm sure British is going to ask exactly the same question. Why would you classify it as illegitimate when everybody signed up for it?
Well, did the people? I suppose, yeah. At some point, people voted in. When was the first referendum in England?
1970 something. 79, I believe.
79 was it? Okay.
I believe. Though Britisher should know. Do you know Britisher?
No, I don't know off the top of my head, but it is somewhere early 70s, I believe. Yes.
Early 70s.
What was promised then is not what became. It was
1972.
It job. So you look at how these people are governing us now, and I think that I don't know, there are so many examples of pure incompetence, government overreach, the fact that our government gets undermined by it when we were members. I mean, I suppose that's still going on to an extent now, but hopefully soon not anymore. So yeah, wasn't it just promised as an economic union, and that was that?
Yes, the idea was really for it to be an economic trade area. Yes.
And from that, I believe that the ideologues who are structuring this thing, who built it, hoped that economic union would lead to political union. And I'm not sure that point was really driven home. Like, yeah, we're going to be a United States of Europe. that that's what this is going to become. Your national identity is going in the bin, and we'll have an army and a flag and a new anthem and a central bank. I think a lot of this was it was very sneakily done, and it was never really publicized. They passed laws, they passed regulation. Few people would know this was going on unless you were in a business that was affected.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Carry on with your point that you were saying before. Obviously, beforehand when I cut you off.
I don't remember now. It's too early in the morning for me. Sorry.
In all fairness, I'm not sure whether there was really a kind of guiding hand. I think it's one of those things where, you know, I'm this kind of bland person that always says, well, sometimes things just occur. Certain trends occur naturally without there really being, you know, forgive me for the use of the word, but without there being a conspiracy or a conspiracy of silence to somehow bring something about. I think when it comes to the European Union, it was something in which the various nations and the various governments kind of got involved without themselves quite realizing the dynamics of it and where it was going to take them. I really don't think that it was kind of a kind of sneaky plan. Let's all get together. We want to achieve A, B, C, and D, but we won't tell the people about it. I really don't think that that was really how it worked. It was more a matter of, oh well, this seems this seems a reasonable idea, and then one thing led to another, and without ever having intended it, they kind of slid down this slippery slope.
Sure. Perhaps I think also that there's a great disconnect from those people working in Brussels with the middle working class people of Britain, and a slight snobby attitude that we know what's best for them.
Yes.
I don't think there's any. There might not be, hey, let's absolutely con these people. I'm sure that a lot of these people feel it's benevolent what they're doing, but there's not on the other hand, there's not the, hey, let's welcome them to the table and see what they think. I mean, if anybody said, you know what, I hate globalism to a member of the European Parliament, they'd probably go, oh God, what an old-fashioned way of looking at the world. Get with the times, be open-minded.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems we really had when we look at how the European Union got started is that we have to understand that, first of all, we were not in it when it was founded.
Mm-hmm.
So when it was a matter of setting up the institutions, who is in there? You know, effectively minor nations plus the French and the Germans. Now, the Germans had just kind of sullied their score sheet, so to speak. They were not really in a position after the Second World War to start telling the other European nations how they should run their institutions. That would not really have worked. So effectively, it fell entirely to the French. And one of the problems in that regard is that the French very much have a political aesthetic, so to speak, of having an elite that runs things. And of course, that was kind of infused into the way the European Union was set up right from the beginning. Had we been in there with them, with our completely different political sentiment, there might have been a somewhat different setup. But once, in a way, the building blocks had been set down, once the foundations were there that had been set down by the French, then a kind of French political elitarian system had been created from which there was no escape. And I think that, when you say that there is a certain arrogance, there is a certain haughtiness, and also a certain detachment there from the government, that is almost there by design. And it is very much the French model. And that's one of the problems, that the very foundations of the whole system suit one country, and the rest of Europe is kind of scratching the back of its head, going, what on earth are we going to do about it? And for decades, one has really held out the idea of, oh, well, you know, we can always reform it. We can always reform it. And I think what has happened is Britain eventually just lost patience and went, look, folks, we've been told that one could reform this body for decades. Trust us, it's not going to happen. And to be honest, yes, I think the Brits are right on this one. I really don't think that you can really reform this creature. It was basically, it was wrong right from the outset. Sorry if I went off on a tangent there, but
no, good points.
No,
very good point.
And somebody, I'm not sure, but it blows my mind, Brett, but it's addressed to you and I want to know what it means, so maybe you'll know. And if not, the order 1814, you'll have to elaborate. He said the British are an ogre. Remember that Thatcher, Prime Minister Thatcher, said no, no, no. And so I'm trying to place that into what we were just talking about. It don't fit for me. What does he mean?
Well, that has got to do with the fact when Margaret Thatcher handbagged the European Union. Basically, it goes back to the time when she wanted a rebate, because the way finances were calculated, you know, regarding the contribution each country had to make, Britain was paying above the odds. Because due to the fact that we have a much smaller agricultural sector, because we're the most urbanized country in Europe due to our industrial revolution having begun before everyone else's, due to our therefore receiving much less farming subsidies, we were overall paying much more than everybody else, really, per capita. So she dug in her heels and said, Britain wants a rebate to kind of rebalance the fact that we are an exception in that respect. And as per usual, the other European countries said, oh, well, yes, this is something we can talk about over time, you know, and it was clear it was procrastination. One was maybe going to address it, but it was going to be more than likely, you know, one was going to extract some favors in exchange and so on, you know, the horse trading. And Thatcher was adamant and said, no, there is not going to be any horse trading. There is not going to be any delay. This must be sorted. We are paying you much too much money, and we are not going to continue doing this. But then, obviously, she was in a minority of one. But in those days, in the European Union, everything needed to be addressed by, decided by unanimity. So she had the trump card that basically, no matter what the European Union wanted to decide, Thatcher would simply go, no. She would simply stop all European business. Nothing was going to be decided until the European Union was going to address this. And it came to quite a crisis. The other government heads were getting quite irate at times because they suddenly realized that Britain was basically just saying nothing else is going to be decided, nothing, until we address this point. And therefore, Thatcher saying no, no, no became a very, very you know, famous incident. It's basically where she just clobbered everyone with her handbag and eventually walked away with the rebate, which was substantial at the time. Of course,
it's still in effect now.
It would be unlikely to happen because the veto decision, you know, the fact that you have to have unanimity, has been largely done away with for most decisions, just due to the fact that there are now that many nations in there that just for practicality's sake, one needed to reduce that. So that power of a British Prime Minister to just basically go no, no, no would no longer be there. Sorry, again, tangent. Apologies.
No, thanks for that. That was answered my question and addressed what was being said.
Yeah.
We'll roll on.
I wondered what that speech was about as well. I just seen a clip of it, but you know.
Well, I suppose I'll move on to another question then, as we're talking about the EU. What do you think about Brexit?
You know, my mood changes on that quite a lot. Like sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's going to be fine. They're going to get through the negotiations. Everything will be all right. And other times I feel like we're being shafted. And then I don't know. Actually, it's
Well, we're
Right
definitely
now.
being shafted at the minute. We're definitely being shafted at the minute, considering they're giving us ultimatums and you need to pay this before we go and do this. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're definitely being shafted at the minute. So I can definitely see your point there. But what was your feeling when we first actually left or decided to leave?
I was over the moon. I was absolutely over the moon. I voted for Brexit, so and that is the one of the last votes I can ever do unless I go back to live in England. So I felt really, really chuffed that we came out on top. I was just so happy. What about you guys? Did you guys party that night? I went out. I got absolutely shit-faced with my mates. We were dancing and, you know, yelling for England. It was great.
Yeah, hey, Brent, did you go out and get shit-faced with your mates and dance with them?
I actually voted Remain, which no doubt will now cause consternation in Vietnam.
No, I just thought it was funny where he's asking the question generally. So I just was curious if you went out, like had a lot of whiskey or something, some beer, and danced with a lampshade on your head that night.
Well, yes, given that I'm kind of a teetotaler in that regard, that was unlikely to happen in any case.
Well, I had a nice whiskey. I had a nice whiskey and a cigar on that night, so I enjoyed the night itself.
You gave your best Winston Churchill impression, did you?
I did indeed. I gave my best impression of Winston Churchill. Yes.
Yeah, nice. The only people that celebrated with me were Americans. They all were behind it. My English friends were. I think I only have one or two people who voted leave, and they were all quiet.
Now you have another.
Well, those Americans that celebrated with you, would you say that many of them were Trump supporters?
One of them is, yes. One of them loves Trump.
The reason I ask that is because Brexit and Trump are very much seen as kind of, you know, two sides of the same coin, that they're kind of part of the same phenomenon.
Yeah, no, the other friends are libertarians. So they just want limited government, and they see global government as the enemy of liberty, basically.
Well, Brett, what they see it is a vote against that unseen guiding hand that you don't believe in and will not take any time to even consider. They see it as a vote against that globalist takeover that is, you know, maybe going on. I don't know.
So, do you actually think that Brexit itself is going to be a good thing or a bad thing if we're allowed to get on with ourselves? Do you think we'll go on to World Trade Organizations, or do you think we'll actually get a deal?
I don't know. It's very hard to predict these things, and I don't want to look silly and make a big prediction and get it all wrong.
Very wise, very wise, very wise, sir.
Would you like me to make a prediction first?
If we were to actually get a Brexit, like if it happens, I think it probably will happen in a meaningful sense. Like in the end, I'll look at the terms and say, okay, that's good enough. I'm happy enough now with our. Yeah, I prefer that we just walked away and went to WTO. What do they call it? Stipulations, conditions, or whatever. So that would be good. And I think we'll be just fine on our own outside the EU. It will have short term. There'll be you know, a downturn in the economy, but in the long run, I see it as great for the country.
Well, if I just may, there was one thing that occurred to me today when I was watching the news, and they were talking about the you know, the payment, the divorce bill, as they like to call it, which at the moment, you know, May is offering 20 billion. And, you know, it now looks as if there might be wanting Britain to say, well, okay, we'll pay you 40 billion. And Britain, in a way, between, you know, is more than likely willing to pay 40 billion, but wants kind of an assurance from the Europeans behind the scene, as in, look, we are not going to say 40 billion. If you then say, okay, that's your bid. But we want 60 billion, so let's make it 50. Do you understand what I mean? So they want to know that when they're actually saying 40, it means 40. But what occurred to me while I was hearing this was, hang on a moment, this is a very interesting scenario, because if the British government pays out that money, then it's effectively, it signs up to the deal. We all know that politicians never make mistakes. So the British politicians, the government, are then going to be invested in backing the deal, because otherwise they would have spent £40 billion of our money on a bad deal, which of course they would never do, because that would be a mistake. So in a way, no matter what the result of any resulting trade negotiations, what that's going to be, they are going to then tell us how marvelous the result is, irrespective of what it actually is. And let's face it, none of us are going to be privy to any of the fine print. But they are going to tell us that it's marvelous, because if it isn't marvelous, they would have spent all that money in vain. So I think we have to be prepared for a serious public relations exercise on the side of the politicians once these negotiations have been concluded, because they'll all try and tell us that it's marvelous simply because they are invested due to the fact that they've spent all this money. And I think the European Union knows that, which is a kind of interesting dilemma.
No, I definitely agree.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
I literally definitely agree, because if you, as you quite rightly said, Britisher, if you're going to say that you're going to pay this money, you are then invested into taking whatever deal is put on the table, because you're going to pay the money. So you have to then accept almost any deal that's on the table.
I mean, the other aspect, I made a video on this once. This isn't my plugging videos; it was a long time ago, in which I kind of argued another angle. And I still think that this angle is very live because of the Eastern Europeans. And that is, I really don't think the European elite in Brussels is quite aware of how much they're playing with fire here. Because the harder they make the deal on the British, the more they are basically going to say to the rest of the European Union, see, this is what happens to you if you seek to leave our union. So the more punitive they make it upon the British, the more they effectively convince all their existing members that they are prisoners and they cannot leave. And particularly when it comes to the Eastern European countries, who of course know what it means to be part of an organization they couldn't leave when they were a part of the Eastern Bloc under the Soviets. They won't like that one jot. And therefore, the European Union is in quite a precarious condition. As in, this has got the capacity to actually break the whole game. Because there could be a veritable revolt, particularly from the Eastern European countries, if it is seen to be too harsh on the British.
Yeah.
Do you not think that they know that, though? I'm sure that they are aware. They're in an incredibly precarious and weak position.
At the outset, I thought obviously they would be aware of that. But the way they are conducting themselves, and this is what I mean, I think the European countries, if you look at Germany and you look at France and look at Holland, those countries, those governments, they have got individual positions. They know that they are seeking to kind of look after their own national interest. And it is within their national interest to get some deal with the British. But as far as the bureaucrats in Brussels are concerned, who in a way are required by the other European nations to be their middlemen, I'm not sure if those European players are actually interested in the various national interests, or whether they are just playing their game of the British have upset us. When you listen to the Verhofstadts and you listen to Jean-Claude Juncker, and more when you listen to what's he called, Barnier, the negotiator, you get the sense that I'm not sure this is just hard bargaining. I am more and more, even though I never thought this could be the case, I am more and more beginning to wonder whether we might, in fact, end up with a no-deal scenario at the end. Simply because I'm not sure whether they're actually negotiating in good faith.
Well, I don't think they're negotiating in good faith either, to be honest. But I think, personally, I honestly do think this. I think that Brussels and the negotiating team have severely underestimated the resolve of the British public. And as you quite rightly said before, you voted Remain. But now that you've looked at the treatment of how the European Union are treating us, and you've said it before, and I'm sure you'll say it again, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, you are now at the absolute point of going, well, if they're going to do this to us, let's walk away. We don't need them. We'll try and do this on our own.
Well, I mean, I was in a way from day one. The moment the election had happened, I was saying, well, that's the result, so that's what we voted. But
no, that's
when it comes to the actual deal, if we end up in a situation where they believe they've got us over the barrel, then yes, I think just for the sake of national sovereignty. I mean, there was one or two things said by Barnier today regarding, not just regulation and law that would still need to remain in place in Britain for us to be able to get a good trade deal, but even mention of taxation levels and things like that. And you just think, hang on a moment, I'm sorry, but if we're a sovereign state and we're not within your organization, then you are not in any position to dictate our taxation levels. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
You do feel at some point, no matter what the no matter what the impact on your economy, no matter what the effect overall is, yes, at some point you just have to be willing to walk away. And at first, when these negotiations began, I could never have imagined it. I would have thought, look, it's in everybody's interest. Whereas now, looking at it, given that I think that the middlemen who are actually doing the negotiation on behalf of the European Union, who do not seem to actually be that bothered about the national interests of the various European Union countries, that's where I think it really has got the potential to just all turn sour and end up in no deal.
No, I agree. The reason why I was going down that road is to make a point of saying that I personally think if there was another referendum, which, before I go any further, I do think that there should not be another referendum. There's already been one. We don't need to have another one. But if there was, I do honestly believe that because of the way the European Union has been acting, I honestly feel that most people that voted leave last time would look at what's going on now and go, no, we are going to leave. And I honestly do think like that. Simply
yes,
because
I think
of
the majority would be much bigger. I think they have done themselves absolutely no favors over there. Yes.
Yeah. No, that was just my point. What do you think about that on the offensive? Or yeah.
Yeah, I have little to add actually. I agree. I agree with what the British are saying. I don't think a no deal would be a disaster though. I still think we'll be fine. I'm quite positive about our ability to innovate, be an entrepreneurial nation, and be able to trade with other countries and survive on our own 2 feet. A trade deal with the European Union would of course be nice, be preferable, but I almost, they're so butthurt about it. It's not surprising in a way that they're behaving like this.
Well, our leaving is an enormous blow to their status, and that is just a fact. You have to understand that they have, as the European Union, 2 members of the Permanent Security Council of the United Nations, Britain and France. We are 2 nuclear powers. We are 2 countries who are actually capable of projecting power across the world. So with our leaving, it leaves them with 1, which is a serious, diminution of their status, so to speak, in the world. And they see themselves very much as a sort of future world player, if you know what I mean. So for Britain to walk away, it's not the same thing as if Holland or Spain or Italy would have left. It really, really is a big blow to them.
Definitely, especially when we trade 52% of their national GDP, as in the European national GDP.
Sorry?
Sorry, I misspoke on that occasion, especially considering that
I think 50% or so of our trade is with them.
Yeah,
and
52% is with them.
We are something like, is it the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world?
The 6th at the minute. We slipped from the 5th.
Yeah, so I think in that regard, again, in economic terms, yes, it's a big thing. And there are quite a few countries who realize that there will be a significant impact. And David Davis is playing quite a game in which he is going to these various countries, particularly to the regions affected, and talking with their kind of regional governments and regional governors in order to try and get them to lobby their own country's governments to kind of say, look, are you aware of what kind of an impact this is going to have upon us if you don't come to some kind of agreement with Britain? And of course, I think those countries would be quite keen to intervene, except, of course, they're being held hostage at the moment by these middlemen who are doing the negotiations on behalf of everybody. The only voice that more than likely is significant that could really, pound the table and say no is Germany. And they are at the moment in complete disarray. As we saw, their coalition talks have just collapsed. So they will not have a stable government in place for some time to come. And, just the moment when we actually need a strong Mrs. Merkel to kind of be able to thump the table and tell Jean-Claude Juncker to bloody well get on with it, that's the very time when basically her government falls apart, which is just our luck, really.
Well, saying all of that, what do you think that our future is going to be, or what would you perceive our future to be?
Is that for me?
It is, yeah. Sorry, I should have pointed that out.
It's very hard. It's very hard to know. There is so many. There seems to be so much going on at the moment. The country seems incredibly divided. I was just back there in late September and October, and in one sense, it feels like everything's just ticking on just fine. The pub's still open, and but there are times I don't know. I fluctuate on these things. One moment I'm very positive, and I go, well, the country will be fine. Everything's going to be okay. The next, I start thinking that civil war's imminent. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to make any predictions, I'm afraid. What do you reckon, Common Sense Cat?
I honestly think that we'll be fine. I think even us leaving the European Union will not collapse the European Union. It needs to have either Italy leave or Greece completely and utterly crash out.
Well, that's boring. Come on, man. What about some Illuminati shit or like the end of the world, Armageddon, or come on, Brit's got I forgot the Brit's up, so he's got something like that, I'm sure. Sorry, Britisher. Sorry.
Yeah, that's my honest opinion. I mean, I don't think that too much will change, really, because no matter who's in government, they're still going to be in government. They're still going to do what they want to do rather than what the people wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think too much will change. The idea of Brexit is a great idea, and the fact that we get our borders back would be great. I'm quite happy with that. Get a deal, and if we do get a deal, what deal does it actually affect on us? As you quite rightly said, there's a hell of a lot of variables. I'll get there. Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah, there's definitely a hell of a lot of variables that just can't really be seen or touched upon at this moment in time because we just don't know what's going on. I mean, we've got over another year, roughly, just another year and a bit, year and 3 months, roughly, 4 months in total, until we get this trade deal sorted. And I don't know. Personally, if we can't even decide what we're going to do because the European Union is not going to move forward because they're putting a stumbling block in the way at the minute saying if you don't pay us money, we're not going to talk to you. like a child. I just don't see where anything's going to go forward, and it just means that we're going to go on to World Trade Organization rules, which is fine. It's not too much of a problem. I mean, some food will go up in price. That's definite. Quite a lot will change. We'll have more open trade with more of the world for India, Australia, New Zealand again. Probably get beef from Argentina again. So there's lots of different bits that we can already go for and already had deals beforehand. So we can go back to those type of things. I don't know. To me, it just seems that there's so much that could happen, so much that could go wrong, but there's also so much that could go right as well. And
Yes.
I always like to look for the stuff that can go right. And either way you look at it, if we have a deal or we don't have a deal, there's so much that we can do to make ourselves better anyway. We'll be the masters of our own universe, so to speak.
Yes. What was it? Enoch Powell said, you know, one of the silliest sayings is that you can't set the clock back. And he goes, what a load of nonsense. Of course you set the clock back. If you see the time is wrong, you set it back. If you want, you could even set it forward. And I think it's a good attitude to have. But like I said, there's a lot of variables. And I think we need to be mindful that 97.5% of the news coverage on Brexit is entirely negative. Mm-hmm. It's guilt tripping the Brexiteers and doom and gloom stuff. The only people who are positive about it as well aren't there. They're not in the meeting rooms. They're not in Brussels. They don't know the ins and outs of what's going on and what the relationships are like between different players. And the people who are involved directly are politicians who lie about everything. So it is quite difficult to know really where things are actually at and how things are actually going. And this bill, this 40, what was it again? 40 million?
40 billion.
Yeah.
40 billion.
Yes.
Jesus wept. Anyway, this bill may, you know, in 2 weeks, this might be out of the news and it's resolved. You never know how these things are going to play out.
When you put it like this, I think, you know, context is important. I mean, the 10 billion or so would be what we would be paying them anyway, every year. Every year, every year, in or out, we would be paying them this, you know. So we have to kind of look at it. Look, if we would have to, in order to get away from this institution, if we have to pay them 4 years worth, you know, if we basically have to continue for the next 4 years to continue paying them what we were paying them anyway, just for it to end, then as such, as far as budgeting would be concerned and whatever, nothing would really change for 4 years. But it would mean that thereafter it would be at an end. So even if it is 40 billion, it's an outrage, but I think Britain could easily cope with it. But yes, I think when it comes to, you know, what the future holds, you know, Britain, you know, Britain's an old girl. She will roll on regardless. You don't suddenly just collapse the 6th biggest economy on the planet. There are worries, you know, short to medium term. You know, one of the things that you look at is foreign investment into Britain. You would understand how foreign investors at the moment would be rather they would be rather hesitant in investing into Britain because, well, if you don't know what you're investing in at the moment, you would be hesitant to do so. So that is a bit of a worry because, you know, investment means jobs. You know, that's just the straightforward of it. On the other hand side, I've mentioned this before. One of my other worries is politics. It's the actual politicians. I think, you know, we've in a way had almost like a straitjacket on, but so too also a padded one. So that no matter what the stupidity of our own politicians, it always kind of got absorbed by you know, the European Union, that they would either overrule it or something else would happen. Once we are completely sovereign again, once we stand on our own 2 feet again, we then also have to be grown-ups when it comes to our own laws. So it would be nice if, you know, Harriet Harman could propose some law that hasn't got anything to do with, you know, feminism, more nipples. You know, it would just be useful to know that if we effectively have to be a grown-up nation again, that is completely on its own and isn't just some toddler that is getting guidance from Brussels, that we then actually have grown-up politicians taking care of our country again. And I think that is where it may take a certain amount of time, whereby, you know, once we leave the European Union, they may continue on with their kindergarten tactics for some years to come before eventually they kind of grow out of it because they realize, hang on a moment, we can't afford this anymore now. So those would be my you know, my thoughts on that particular part of the future. When it comes to what you said about, you know, potential civil war or something like that, no, you know, the Brits aren't the types. We don't. It's the continental Europeans who have revolutions and behead their aristocracy and that sort of thing.
Cromwell.
Yes, I mean 17th century, my dear friend. I mean that's a long, long time ago. You know, if you look at all the social upheaval that we've had in the century since then, Britain has been remarkably stable. We really are not.
There are now two very, very different views and ideals for the future of the country that are in direct conflict with one another.
Oh yes, we seem to be in a kind of transition period, but I think this is happening everywhere in the world. There is, we seem to be, yes, we seem to be in a time of some sort of change. It's just that we don't quite know what the change means because we're in the middle of it. We don't have the benefit of hindsight. You know, having seen, you know, the wall come down in Eastern Europe and things like that, I've seen kind of big things happen, big changes occur. But when they're actually occurring, you aren't really, you don't know what it will mean. It's all a complete unknown. Everything looks a bit chaotic. And I think that's again what we're seeing now. We're seeing kind of an era of sort having come to an end, and we're about to enter the next one. And I don't just mean with Britain and Brexit. I mean generally, globally speaking, we're within a time of change. And once those things settle down again, then I think everything is going to look considerably less drastic.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I can't argue that point anymore. I suppose we can move on to our last question if nobody has any other points to make.
I thought the ogre had something to say about the Illuminati. No, he's
no. I'll save it to the end.
No worries then.
Actually, I mean, it's not really about the Illuminati, but this is the notes that I've written today. It's been very interesting to me, but I condensed it down. But yeah, the Illuminati is just a general term. I mean, Adam Weishaupt did want to foment revolution. I mean, these ideals did start the, you know, the Bolshevik Revolution, the French Revolution. You can just look at their literature and their, you know, what their plans and everything to lay it out. To state that there's not a guiding hand. So the future, very briefly, well, I don't know. I'm not a member of the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission. I have no idea. I don't go to Bilderberger. I don't really believe everything for the infiltrators that are coming out that, you know, say they got people in the meetings. How do they do that? They're them too, as far as I know. They're they. Gerald Celentes is somebody I like to really check out. Gerald Celentes and Trends Forecasters magazine, very good, intelligent person. 98%, correct?
I've only one response to that, and that is, in your mind's eye right now, picture that Trump meme of Trump. You know, it's a GIF of Trump looking at you, just saying, "Wrong."
Yeah. About which one? About what? About the Gerald Celentes?
About the whole Illuminati thing. But anyway, no, please. Yeah.
Oh, so you're calling? Who are you calling wrong? Myself or the people that said that they've had a hand in it? Because I won't. I mean, if you want to talk to me about it or debate that, that's fine. But I know a lot about it, Brett. In fact,
Shall we leave the Illuminati?
I was trying to make light of it in
Oh
order
yeah.
to move on. But
yeah. Okay,
yeah.
I get it. I got the joke. Yeah, right.
On the offensive, do you have any questions for either of us three at all? Any questions at all?
I don't think so, chaps. But I was going to say one thing that I read that was quite interesting. It was from a guy who was in the former Soviet Union and talking about it just before its collapse. And he said there was this sort of ambience of surrealism and cast over everything. Nothing felt quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, to those just tuning in, it's 6 a.m. here and I woke up at 3. So, you know, I'm trying to get there. But yeah, nothing felt authentic. And there was just this very strange atmosphere that, you know, there's certain sort of je ne sais quoi to public life that no one could quite pinpoint. And then suddenly the whole thing just tumbled down. And sometimes I feel like there's the same sort of essence to public life in Britain. You watch a show like Question Time, or you listen to Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, and sometimes it doesn't feel real. The opinions you hear, the ideas that are apparently unacceptable, that I find very ordinary, normal sentiments, a lot of the things just going on in our society seem so utterly bizarre. So that's why sometimes, you know, after I read that sort of stuck with me, the way the man described that feeling. And there's just so much in the media and online. It's utterly bizarre. We live in very bizarre times where people say things that are just the opposite of true and everyone plays along.
I think there's a beautiful parallel that we're just actually witnessing in that of exactly the sort of sentiment you're expressing. And that is when you look at Zimbabwe, that a week ago, you would have had all Zimbabwean politicians still telling any, BBC news outlet or whatever that they're just showing colonial attitudes and that President Mugabe is the greatest president that Zimbabwe has ever had and yada, 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 yada. And within a few days, they're all out there saying, oh, well, yeah, he'll have to go. And it kind of just shows that basically one was just, in a way, parroting the lines that everybody else was parroting. And they were becoming ever and ever, more meaningless, if that's possible.
Yes, tumultuous change just sneaks out of nowhere, it seems. These revolutions, like you said about the benefit of hindsight, we can see where they come from after they've happened. But during it, sometimes I do feel like we're on the brink of something. That a lot of systems in place in the UK currently are just completely unsustainable. We already talked about immigration and Islam in the country and things like that, but also the welfare state and the just how bloated the government is, and now we're going through this Brexit deal. There's just so much going on.
Well, we live in interesting times. I mean,
yes.
you only need to look at the field of technology, which is bringing about revolution after revolution, and this seems to be only the beginning of it. I mean, with robotics and artificial intelligence coming in, I mean, there are predictions that is it by 2030 or whatever, something like 40 to 50% of all jobs in the United Kingdom and the United States could be gone, and urgently need to be replaced by something else. Those sort of things, all of this kind of is one giant kind of revolutionary time, where we are just basically stuck in the middle of it. And there is absolutely no way that we can know what is happening if we're in the snow globe while it is being shaken.
And if you think about it as well, World War I, before World War I, pretty much every country in Europe was a monarchy, and by the end of World War I, or by a few years after it, they'd all changed to democracies. I think I'm right on that.
It was a culling of all the old monarchies and aristocracies. Yes,
right. And one wonders what's next after democracy, because I don't see it surviving. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's time limit, but I almost feel like we're in the final days of it. That the government just continues to expand, and the immigration continues to go up, and the politicians continue to screw over the public, and these things just have grown and grown steadily and steadily. You know, it's interesting when you think that the war for independence was fought over a 3% tax. I think my dad pays about 50% now. You know, this is sort of, how much longer can people get shafted like this? This is my feeling.
Well, I'm not quite as pessimistic when it comes to democracy. I think that Western democracy definitely will still continue on. I think what we may see is some kind of intellectual challenge emerge in the same way that we had a challenge emerging from the Soviet Union once, you know, where they were the kind of the country that was presenting themselves as the alternative model. I think we may see something like that emerge from China, where they present themselves to the rest of the world as the kind of rival model. Oh, you can have capitalism, but with, you know, autocracy from a one-party state. And how we deal with that remains to be seen. But I cannot see sort of old democracies like Britain, France. Let's even include the colonials from across the pond in this, you know, even the Americans. I cannot see them just giving up on democracy anytime soon.
I'm not so sure if it'll be a giving up or more of a collapse, in the same way that the EU seems destined for collapse.
I don't see any sign of a collapse in democracy, because to my mind, democracy is cultural. I don't think it's just a political idea. I think one of the reasons, for example, why we have proved so absolutely useless as trying to instigate democracies in other countries is because those countries are culturally alien to the entire concept of democracy. And you would effectively have to occupy them for decades, if not centuries, in order to kind of be able to instill that within them. If you just take over Iraq and try and give them democracy, it's not going to work, because it's in a way a cultural marker. And in Europe, I think that cultural marker is well and truly established. I cannot see how you would undo it.
Oh, I think it's already been undone.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's not a problem. I think that it's already being undone, because I think the idea of the European Union is a socialist in ideal. Now, I'm not saying that it was written by Marx. I'm not saying that it was written by the Socialist or Communist Manifesto. But if you look at it from just an outward look, or an inward look, should I say, actually, sorry, you actually see all the tendencies of a social democracy, which is a form of socialism, obviously. And I feel that that's the point, that democracy will fail. That form of trying to make big democracy, that will fail. And it will go back to a nationalistic democracy where governments can actually run by themselves.
I'll be honest, I don't really agree with you here in trying to see the European Union as something quasi-Marxist. I really struggle with that concept.
I didn't say it was Marxist. I said it's a social democracy.
Well, yes, but the word Marxism was mentioned at some point.
Yeah, I said it's not. I'm not saying it was written by Karl Marx. I'm not saying it is socialist. I'm not saying it was written by the Communist Manifesto. Is what I said.
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how one would see the European Union as something that is, you know, socially democratic in that way, because it's effectively.
Would you describe it as a democracy by our standard of democracy?
No, but as I say, it's also not socially, because it's not, you know, a social democracy. That would be something like, you know, something run by a social democratic party or some such thing, whereas this is basically, you know, some kind of bureaucracy that kind of regulates nations. I cannot see that as being socially democratic within itself.
Okay, so what would you say it is then?
You know, if you want, one could describe it as some kind of Kafkaesque bureaucracy. But I'm not sure that it's anything leaning to the right or to the left, because I think it's kind of detached from that.
I'd definitely say that the idea of the EU is a leftist ideal, as in the idea of globalism, making one world government.
Again, I don't see globalism as necessarily something leftist.
I suppose that's down to personal view.
They promote it more than everyone else. So, I mean, when you see, I'm not going to say it's leftist. I don't know that. I'm really not up on Marxism and the left so much to know all of their articles and liturgies, but I do know that it's being promoted right now by the left. Period. Overwhelmingly. Why? I don't know. They don't like sovereignty. It's just the way. It's so like open immigration here. At least I can speak to. It's very, very much left. But
yeah,
I don't. Again, I don't know that it's a left idea.
Yeah, globalism appeals to their ideals, and it makes them feel good about themselves, and that's important, isn't it, guys? You've got to feel good about yourself with your outlook. Hey, we're stronger together. That's what they want to feel. I was going to say something on what you said. Oh, democracy being cultural. I don't doubt it, Britisher, and I think you're absolutely right on that point. But a central government that really offers us no choice whatsoever, I don't think is particularly innately British. I mean, I've got to choose between May and Corbyn. Whoop-de-doo. That's basically our choice. Of course, community panels and councils and small organizations that are run by people where they negotiate, where they debate and take votes in a democratic manner. I think that is definitely part of who we are. That's how we like to organize things. We like that kind of structure. We see it as fair. It appeals to our sense of fairness. But the difference that you always say democracy, like it's on a cultural level, will always exist. I agree. I just don't see this government retaining legitimacy and a lot of the systems that they have in place. You just look at, say, the National Healthcare Service. So even 10 years after it was established, there were huge problems emerging with the fact that no prices can be accurately measured and doctors leaving the country. And now you go to the NHS and you hear people talking about not being able to read the patient slips because it's been written by somebody who can't really speak English, because all of our doctors leave and we have to import these doctors from abroad who can't speak English properly. These kind of things are huge problems that cannot be solved. You can't solve the NHS problem. It's a socialist project. It's going to go down the pan eventually. And so are all these other projects that we have and these programs that exist. They're just by nature they're guaranteed to fail. Just in the same way that the Soviet Union could not sustain itself. So yeah, maybe democracy will just be drastically reshaped, and we'll get a very, very limited government out of this, out of all these programs going bankrupt and nobody being able to pay for them and whatnot. But I don't know. I do see it as just that at the moment, I have no faith in the government whatsoever. And when enough people hold that sentiment, that's when a government collapses. Because the only thing propping them up is the opinion of the masses that they're legitimate.
Well, I think there is also the alternative future, and that is that there is the potential of some sort of democratic renewal throughout the entire West, which could indeed be part of the entire rediscovery of our national identities, of strengthened national identities. So I don't think it need be quite as calamitous. Perhaps in the end, I'm fairly sort of positive in outlook, due to the fact that I previously sort of looked ahead and sort of thought, oh my God, how on earth is this going to work itself out? And mankind has a way of not kind of destroying itself, if you know what I mean. So I'm not sure. I really put it like this. I still believe that good old Blighty will kind of come out on top in the end.
Okay. I like your positivity, and you sell it well, sir. You make me feel better about the future.
Well, I mean, and once we've reconquered the colonies on the other side of the Atlantic, and taken over India again, and things like that, things are going to be a doddle. There's a reason I have this avatar, you see.
Yeah, I like it. Where's our host on? Where's our host?
By the way, am I the only one who gets the impression, particularly when the ogre isn't speaking, so you see his avatar as the small screen on the bottom of the screen? Does it always does it look as if he has got a kind of white gorilla superimposed, walking from right to left on his screen?
I can't see it.
The big blob right here?
Yes, it's the blob behind him. Yes, there where the curtain is drawn aside. If you
sorry about
look at that, it looks like it's when you don't see it on full screen, it looks like it's a white gorilla walking across the screen. He's now just to spite me, he's destroyed that entire
No,
effect.
it's not that. I forgot to close that. That's like, it's one of my laboratories back there, and you can see my heavy bag and stuff.
His laboratory. So you understand we are talking to Dr. Crippen here.
No, I make soap and other things. And, it's part. I mean, I have a farm.
He's the one who's making the nuclear bombs that we export to Pakistan.
Oh no! Yeah, the ones you export. Yes.
I don't know where I got that idea from. I feel like somebody reliable said that to me. I got to take them to task. I was like, oh, okay, they got nukes, great. Like
the chat said meth lab. Let me just say right away, no, not a meth lab. I can't even joke about that. Where I live out in the country. There are remarkable. I shouldn't laugh when I say this, but I know a guy that killed himself making meth in his shed. Man,
actually, the idea of the Pakistani nuclear bomb is actually quite topical, because it is known that the Pakistanis made a deal with another country, because another country had technology that they required, because they had the bomb, but another country had missile technology that they sort of thought, well, we'll have that, thank you very much, so then we'll be able to actually put our bombs onto missiles in order to fire them at India.
Great.
And the country with whom they got together was North Korea.
Oh, imagine that.
North Korea got the nuclear secrets from Pakistan, or at least some of the basics, and in turn, Pakistan got some missile technology from North Korea. And look where we are today, with North Korea building nukes and trying to yet further perfect its missiles. Yes.
Yeah. And no, neither a meth lab or nuclear science is going on in my laboratories. All kinds of stuff.
You're just one big disappointment. You are aware of that. I mean, here we were.
And it's technical. I guess I use the word laboratory because I do, mix chemicals in there. I make soap. I do a lot of things. There's bright lights. There's centrifuges and other kind of accoutrement.
He was I building you up as some kind of American Dr. No.
Well, they were already
saying, "Oh, well, no, I just make soap back there."
You know these people. I love them too. Let me clear that up. I love every one of you. But you know them, Brett. That little thing. That's why I got this. When I see meth lab joke, I got it right away. I said, no meth lab, because it's snowballs, and then it will be something that will be reasonably, like I'm an arms dealer, or I make ammunition and sell it on the black market, or so. Oh wait, I shouldn't be saying this. I really shouldn't even be saying that, because you know how people do. They'll cut that out. The next thing you know, you got me just saying on a GIF, I'm an arms dealer and blah, 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 blah. It's not good. But, this is great, gentlemen. I would go for a little bit longer. I have to shut the farm down. My birds need to be shut up and stuff. But I must say, on the offensive, you're a really excellent guest, in my humble opinion. You're on point, on the ball. You make some really good arguments, whether I agree or disagree. And you're a hell of a sport to get up at 3 a.m. and to start with us 4 a.m. your time. I don't think you need any apologies for that. You really were on ball. It's always good to it's something when you know you're British. I see this in all three people assembled here with me. and you want to be British in your arguments. I see that with you gentlemen. It's so nice to have folks that may not agree on something, but it don't have to be a pissing contest. You know what I mean? That's how we'd say here in the United States. But anyway, I guess that was a prodding, and I think that was like the last question. I'm just prodding the this guy. It's a little bit. We 2.5 hours, boys. We won't go over 3 hours Common Sense, no matter what, because the algorithm will kill us. Nobody will watch it after that.
No, I was literally just about to say you didn't need to prod us, but I am thankful for the prodding. But I think we will end this very, very soon. We are going to go on to our last words. So if On the Offensive would like to go first, you can plug your channel. You can talk about something we talked about, or a topic that you just want to bring up. You're allowed to talk about whatever you want, and nobody will interrupt you.
I actually don't really have anything to add. I am fading over here. I've got to be honest, lads. I need to get back to bed. But thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. It was great fun.
No worries. Thank you for coming. Okay, then. Well, that leaves me then. To be honest, I don't really have too much to say, but what I will say is when you have somebody like On the Offensive, when he can say things that you may not agree with, which is fine. That's the process that we're supposed to be dealing with. We're supposed to be talking to people that we don't necessarily agree with, to challenge our ideas, to make sure our ideas are the right ideas, not just to, as On the Offensive said before, not just to listen and believe and just follow blindly. We always have to carry on and actually look at what we're doing and actually research what we're trying to say, rather than just following what our mums, our dads, our sisters, our brothers, our friends, whoever is telling us that we should go and do. Not trying to make sure that we go on holiday to Paris and France, and because if we vote Brexit, we won't be able to. So for that reason alone, we're not going to vote. We're going to vote Remain because we're too scared about not being able to go on holiday anymore. You have to look at everything from a analytical point of view rather than a moralistic point of view. Because if you look at it as an analytical point of view, you will get to the moral anyway, because you will look at it from that point of view. Wow, that did not sound right.
I understood what you were saying. I got it.
What I was literally just trying to mean is if you look at it from an analytical point of view, no matter if you believe it is moralistic or to do with the right thing, you will find out what the ideas are. The proper ideas will always come out on top rather than just a moralistic point of view. And I think if you have people on, like On the Offensive, like we have done before with Watch Emit Stories as well, when we have had him on and we've had different debates and things like that, or anybody we disagree with, we will not have a go at them because we want to talk to them and find out what makes them tick, what makes their ideas different to ours and why they think that, because then we can understand their point of view. And if we understand their points of view, we won't fight each other. We will look at the best points of view from each side, and we'll take the best ideas from each side and make it work. And that's how society should work, rather than just trying to attack everybody for having a different opinion. And on that note, I will pass it to TheBritisher.
Well, as per usual, I have very little idea what I actually want to say. But I think I will speak a bit about Britain in this regard, and her future outlook, so to speak. Because it's easy. And it's frequently done to kind of, write a nation off. And one only needed to look at some of the reaction of some people on certain forum boards and whatever after the French elections. Oh, France is finished, France is dead, France is this, France is the other. I, of course, also remember way back when, and in the days of Boris Yeltsin, Russia was kaput, it was finished, it was over. And all I can say is that, certain countries, certain nations are like some kind of biblical force. They don't go away. They are, they are there, and they have bad times and they have good times. If they have a bad time, if they have some kind of depression, if things go wrong, they will recover, and you write them off at your peril. It is much easier nowadays to look at, countries like France and Britain as, well, small to medium-sized nations that are kind of dwarfed next to the giant United States of America or India and China. But if you write them off, you are making some giant mistake, because these countries have been predominant for centuries. Something like that doesn't just disappear. There is a reason why France and Britain are on the permanent members of the Security Council in the United Nations. One recognizes that they represent almost, epic civilizations, despite their small size, and that they have a maturity about them that to a certain extent is lacking in some other countries. And if Britain takes a knock after Brexit, what I say is so be it. Because if you think that in 100 years' time, Britain will will no longer be a predominant nation on the world stage, you are sorely mistaken. Just as Russia has suddenly re-emerged as a player in the Middle East and other places, even though only a few years back it was seen as some kind of bankrupt wreck of a nation, the very same thing can happen to any other country. I am in absolutely no doubt that France also is going to see some kind of renaissance. And I think that this whole Brexit thing is more than likely a kind of beginning of a British renewal. And I'm not talking, British Empire or anything like that, but just as in the 1970s, Britain was seen as a sick old man of Europe, and then it suddenly boomed throughout the 80s. I can very well imagine that we will see a similar phenomenon, that we may take a knock, but we'll be back, because that's what we always do. Anyway, that's enough from me. Over to you, Mr. Ogre.
Oh, thank you, Britisher. I'll try to keep this brief as well. Just once again, thank you so much on the offensive. It was enlightening. It was wonderful. I want to encourage people that were listening, hopefully listened, paid attention. For me, more than I think the most important thing to me for sure right now isn't my final word, my final thoughts. It's the things that I've learned today that I need to think about. I need to think through. Often we would dismiss things one way or another. Everyone, myself included, we dismiss things sometimes. We have our blind spots. We have things that are just either turn-offs or whatever it may be. So one thing very quickly, British, are you feeling all right? Because you did say something nice about France again today, and I just wanted to make sure that you were feeling okay. But yeah, don't discount France or Britain. I thought that was wonderful.
I will let you know when the fever breaks.
I'm just curious. Thank you, mate. I'm glad to hear your voice again. I thought maybe that was the end of you, but we must be nice. But this is what some of the takeaways, as brief as I can be with this. Cultural Christian, I heard you mention in one of your videos, and I can't on the offensive, and I couldn't. I think this is so important. The Western values, the Western Judaic Christian values. There was a time when atheists, homosexuals, everyone went to church. They all followed the values, even if they didn't believe in the God that was preached from the pulpit. Whether it's the left or cultural Marxism coming back, and socialism, or the Illuminati, or whatever you want to think that it is. You can even look, in some of these people that I mentioned may say that they're part of it. These things are under attack. I see them as under attack when we have, transvestites go into story time at the local library, and we have insane people that have their toddler there while a frightening looking cross-dresser is going to, the trannies hips go swish, swish. I can't really remember, but it's kind of, the image is burned in my mind. These things aren't good. When we have this breakdown, I just want to encourage everybody, if you haven't heard of Jordan Peterson, I don't know, maybe you don't have a pulse, go listen to some of his talks. You don't have to go and listen to all of his lectures on his channel. He has hours and hours and hours on, but listen to his, whenever he goes, and I can't remember what it is, 63, Article 63, or whatever it was up there in Canada with the gender and preference and gender pronoun insanity. And listen to the man. I will say this. as a person that's been a preacher, I've been around people that often considered themselves very righteous and very noble. I want to use his word right now, noble. He's the most noble man that I can name right now. No partisanism in his words. No bigotry, no xenophobia, no homophobia, no phobias of any kind, no kind of hate, no kind of Nazism, no kind of isms, no isms, but a simple apologia for logic, reason, and not making laws that would force someone to say or not say something. I think that's fundamental. And I had a couple other things written down here. I'm just going to end with this instead of going through both of them. Nazi, this is bandied around a lot, sometimes in jest. You're a Nazi, you're a fascist. You know, that's just like Hitler. That's why I thought of Peterson. This lady got called in the carpet because as a professor's assistant, she played one of his speeches, and somebody turned her in. They're in there. They made her cry. I heard the tape today. They made her cry, and legitimately with anger and rage and frustration because they were saying that academia was dying because they wanted to appease 0.001%. Without getting on that, because of course someone would see this and say, well, of course, ogres. I'm all these phobias that don't exist. Don't buy into it. Don't buy into the Nazi thing, and don't back down. Why is it when someone doesn't agree with you, they say Nazi? I equate it to falsely accusing someone of rape. I even wrote it down there. Maybe that sounds a little drastic to you, but think about it. When you're accused of rape, your life is ruined. If you're accused of being a Nazi and you have the right job, your life is ruined. Everything could end just like that because of an accusation like that. Makes no sense to say that the Britishers are lefties, therefore don't listen to him, or the Common Senseguy is too centered, so therefore whatever. And of course, I'm a not whatever. These things, if you label them, you're doing wrong. If you buy into labels, you're missing out. So look, remember, be good to your friends, be good to your family members, be good to your loved ones. Be quick to say you're sorry. Be even quicker to accept an apology, especially when that thing your friend, your family member, your loved one has done seems to be so huge, you'll never be able to forget about it. Because panel, constant viewers, you know the truth in your heart at a time you think not. Your friends, your family members, your loved ones, your life, and everything you know will depart from you.